When I'm moving arbitrarily, it's taking away my power.
Hi, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, you'll get my conversations with peak-performing thought leaders, creatives, and entrepreneurs. Every week, I bring you the latest scoop on what these incredible people do to succeed and how you can get their secrets and do it too. And hey, do you want to become a member of the Innovative Virtuoso Club? Our virtuosos get all sorts of exclusive content like bonus episodes just for you and videos to boost creative adrenaline and problem-solving juice. Go to isoldet.com/virtuoso to learn more. And now, let's get on with the show. Hello, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am super thrilled you're here. I'm also really happy to introduce you to this week's guest. He's a new friend and a new colleague, and I'm super excited to bring his insights and his work to you. John Watkis is a professional speaker, speaking performance coach, award-winning performer, and author of the book, Speaking Notes, the 8 Essential Elements to Make Your Speech Music to Their Ears. What a phenomenal book. I can't wait. John coaches leaders who have to develop and deliver high-stakes speeches, pitches, and presentations that capture and keep the attention of audiences and decision makers. And this is something really cool about him that I didn't know until today. He is also a salsa dancing champion and was the first Canadian-born actor to play Mufasa in the Disney musical, The Lion King, which is so wonderful. That's one of my favorites of the Disney musicals. So this is so exciting to have a Mufasa in the guest chair today. John, I'm so thrilled to welcome you.
Thank you, Isolde. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Absolutely. You know, you and I met, I believe, at a National Speakers Association meeting, a year and a half ago, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah. And I remember you got up and because they were saying, does anybody have the beginning of a speech that they want to offer up for feedback? And you got up and you said, yeah, I do. And then you sang Mufasa in The Lion King. And we were all just sitting there. There were about 90 of us in the room, completely blown away. It was incredible. I loved it. What made you decide that this was something that you were like, I'm going to just go up there and I'm going to wow them? What was the process that you went through to get that to be the thing you did?
So I think artists will understand this. And that is, outside of the stage, I'm shy. So if you were to meet me anywhere else other than a place where I was presenting, you probably wouldn't hear me speak. I'm very low key. And I recognize it in myself. And one of the people in the room, Dr. Willie Jolly, had encouraged me to step out more and be more bold. Because when I did The Lion King, when people would ask me what I did for a living, I would tell them that I was an independent contractor. So it's not something that I ever, really wanted to talk about. So me going up that day was really a matter of stepping outside of my comfort zone, realizing it was time to claim what I had done. And so that's why I decided, and Dr. Jolly actually during that meeting was saying, hey, why don't you just go up and show them? So I was prodded.
I remember Dr. Willie Jolly talking, and he was so incredibly, incredibly inspirational. And I'm really glad that he inspired you to break out of your comfort zone. And it's so fascinating to me that you say that you are outside of being on stage when you're giving one of your speeches or performing, or I should say, and or performing, that you're really quite shy. What role do you think breaking out of that shyness has played in you becoming a performer? Did you want to overcome the shyness, or were you always able to keep those two sort of separate, the private you and the performer you?
I would say that the former me, the younger me, was more outgoing. And there were more cultural norms that required me to be quieter and to not show off, and it was considered being a braggart or tooting your own horn if you said good things about yourself. And that wasn't necessarily from a parent's perspective. That's what I got from teachers. So I learned early on not to say good things about yourself, because then people wouldn't like you. But on the stage, people would say it. I've always felt comfortable on the stage. I've always felt comfortable singing. I've always felt comfortable dancing, acting, being the comedian. If you put me in front of a group of people where it's allowed to be bold and say what you want to say, then I'm perfect with that. But now, again, I'm growing into it. I'm more comfortable now in one-on-one situations, but still, growing up, it was more about silencing yourself and not standing out.
I am sorry on behalf of everybody who's ever taught anybody how to do anything that happened to you, because this idea of don't toot your own horn is, to me, has always been a little silly, because if you're not going to toot your own horn, who's going to toot it for you, right? So that's part of what I'm feeling like you were told to hide your light under a bushel instead of don't hide your light under a bushel. And yet you persevered. You ended up with a career on the stage, and now you teach other people how to be professional speakers. What made that happen? Despite other people telling you, your teachers, the authority figures, saying that you shouldn't do that. Do you remember what ended up being the thing that flipped the switch? Was it a moment on the stage that you went, you know what, this is for me? How did that happen?
I can remember exactly why I wanted to speak for a living. In fact, I can remember the date that it happened. It was June 23rd, 1994.
Wow.
Yeah, that is clear, because at the time, I was working for a company that now is long gone. It was Columbia House. And I was in the call center. I was a supervisor, and that company used to send people music and videos in the mail.
Right, I remember.
So for our younger listeners who haven't heard of this, we used to send people 5 CDs for a penny, or three VHS, because we didn't even have Blu-ray at that time. So 5 VHS tapes for $1 or something ridiculous. And then over the course of 3 years, they'd have to buy more. So I was promoted to the position of supervisor of customer service. Mm-hmm. And my director sent me to a session. It was Fred Pryor Seminars, biggest seminar company in the world, which is now is now Pryor Career Track. Mm-hmm. And Darcel Carrington was the presenter that day. It was how to deliver exceptional customer service. And I remember sitting in that seat thinking to myself, that's what I want to do. And it was born 2 years later when Fred Pryor came to Toronto and was looking for seminar leaders. They had the ad in the newspaper. I thought, I'm gonna audition. And I did. I was in one room with one person and a camera, and I gave everything I had. And that propelled me to travel worldwide, teaching on probably 20 to 30 different subjects. So that's when it all started, June 23rd, 1994.
That's amazing. So something in you went, that's what I want. Was it the person's presentation, or was it the subject matter, or was it the fact that there was somebody on stage teaching? Which one of those, or maybe it was a combination, that inspired you like that?
It was a combination. I had been used to speaking, and I had been, again, performing. So I've been performing forever. I had been in front of cameras since probably 10 years old. Uh-huh. And that my mother, in fact, my whole family is artistic when it comes down to it. My whole family is into the arts. So, I was in front of cameras in commercial school. I was in a choir. In fact, I was the assistant conductor of a choir. And I had been in the churches, preaching in the churches as well. So all of that were just little things that I did, but I never considered any of them as a career. But when I saw Darcel Carrington that day, who also had a musical background, his whole family used to sing, who simply captured the entire attention of everyone in that audience, and who taught incredible points. You're talking a full day workshop, and he had people eating out of the palm of his hands. And as an entertainer and as someone who loves to learn, I was blown away by it.
Wow. It's so fascinating to hear that you had this singular moment that made, in many ways, everything in your life shift direction. A lot of people say that it took a while and there were several factors that came into play. But for you, I remember June 23rd, 1994. So, okay. Before you decided that speaking professionally and teaching other people how to speak would be your life's work, you said you were a performer, you've been in front of cameras, and you were doing preaching in churches. Was that another family influence thing, this idea of preaching in churches? Was that a family thing, or was that something you were called to do?
I would say it was something I was called to do.
Okay.
In the churches anyway, to a degree. So many things are interrelated within my family. My grandmother, who passed away in January 2018, she was 99 years, 360 days old.
Wow.
And in her 90s, she was still playing the harmonica in the assisted living facilities.
Wow.
So I can remember her saying she was going to play for the old folks. So that's my family. There isn't a person that I can think of in my family who isn't musical, who can at least sing. My Uncle Garfield, who is more like my big brother because he's only 10 years older than me, who plays the guitar and the bass and percussion. He had a vinyl. He still has a vinyl collection that goes from wall to wall.
Wow.
So, all of this was my inspiration, even down to my sons right now, who are grown adults, they're 27 and 24. My youngest son plays both the keyboard and the guitar. He's masterful at it. The other one, the older, is a spoken word artist, and they both sing. So it's all just part of the family structure. So with the church, I did have relatives who were active, like my grandmother and my uncle and aunt, and I sang at weddings. But when I was in the church, people just asked me to speak one day, and then were absolutely blown away when I opened my mouth. And again, it wasn't a career thing. It was just, I'm going to speak for the youth today. And people were just astonished that I could speak so well. But I don't know a time that I didn't speak well, quite frankly. I remember selling chocolate bars. This was our fundraisers in junior high school. And so I might have been 13, 14. And I remember a security guard saying to me, I don't have $2 to buy chocolate bar right now, but if you want to come back and get a sales job in a couple of years, please do. Because I didn't just say, would you like to buy a chocolate bar? I would say, hi, my name's John Watkis. I go to Oakville Junior High School, and we're fundraising for our trips to go camping. And I'm wondering if you would like to help us out by purchasing a chocolate bar. I'm giving full sales spiels as a teenager. I didn't know how to do it any differently.
It sounds like it was in your DNA to begin with. I love it. That idea of communicating in such a way that a person will not only understand, but want to know more. I love, love, love that. So when you were training, when you were doing some of the musical theater work that you were doing, did you bring that same aspect to it? Was it sort of natural for you, or did you have to actually study? What was that like for you, that idea of training to be in musicals, to be in theater, to be in dance?
I was in high school. Actually, I went to an art school. So you remember the show Fame?
Of course.
I went to a school just like that.
Ah, wonderful.
It was called Claude Watson School for the Arts. But it was more based on my talent than it was my training. And when I say that, there's a person who is a recurring villain in my life. His name is Hans Engel. And the reason Hans is a villain is because he was born to be on the stage. I'm sure he came out and he said, roll on or cut or whatever, or action, whatever you say when you're a director. Because in my audition for the School of the Arts, and I was a theater arts major, by the way. It's a program that I went in. In my audition, they teamed me up with Hans Engel, who was maybe 4'10" at the time, but he was a little man. There was a man inside there. And we were doing a scene. And in the scene, it's supposed to be between a father and a son, and the son doesn't complete about something. And the teacher says, okay, I want you to do a monologue about what you're thinking right now. So Hans goes into the monologue and he starts talking about how disappointed he is and how hurt and all of these feelings. And the teacher says, so at this point, what we think you would be feeling is, and of course, it's exactly as Hans says it. I'm like, bloody hell, who is this guy? And then they give me a line, okay? They give me a line, which is supposed to be something like John Smith, apostate. And when I say the line, Hans looks at me, he goes, you know what an apostate is? I said, no. He said, I can tell. You should probably look it up.
Oh, my stars.
So this is the villain in my entire life. So there are some people who were born for it. I think I have the skills and the talents. I didn't have the acumen or the understanding of what I was supposed to do initially. Mm-hmm. That came with a lot of work. And it should go with saying, I didn't make my school talent show. I didn't make the musical. Deborah Cox, who is a Soul Train Award winner, and right now is still a performing artist. She performed, or we did perform with Whitney Houston when she was alive. We auditioned for the talent show together and didn't get in.
Wow.
So based on accomplishments, you can guess whose fault that was. I didn't make the jazz choir. I was a late bloomer. Mm-hmm. So there really wasn't anything that I can say I studied. Oh, by the way, I failed in grade 11. They kicked me out of the theater arts program after grade 11 because I didn't pass.
Oh, my goodness.
It's okay. It all worked out. I ended up going to a different school in Toronto. It was one of only 2 schools in Canada that had a full television studio, mm-hmm. which meant that in addition to knowing what it meant to be in front of the camera, I learned the entire production side behind, and I did very well in the television production program.
That's so interesting. I wonder how that informs you as a performer. Could you talk about that for a sec? Like knowing the production side, knowing what goes on behind the camera as opposed to in front of the camera, how does that affect what you do when you're on stage or when you're on camera? What role does knowing all of that play in how you perform?
Absolutely everything. Because there's such a difference in knowing what to say versus how the audience perceives it. And I got that revelation, as I understood it, a revelation when I was watching The Lion King for the first time in the audience. I had seen it on stage. Mm-hmm. And when they subbed me out after months and months of performing it, and there was one particular scene where Mufasa comes back.
Ah, the star scene.
Simba, you have forgotten me. You've forgotten who you are, and so have forgotten me. And that whole scene there.
I love it.
And there's this point where there's a mask. And when we did the show, and the dancers would put pieces of the mask together, mm-hmm. it looked messy backstage. In fact, every show, I would go to the dancers and go, guys, the mask sucked today. It sucked. And so when I went to watch the show and sit in the audience, and they put the mask pieces together, and then they had the strobe lights and the special effect, a tear rolled down my face because of the difference in the effect of how the audience sees it.
Sure.
And so for me, when I think of camera angles and even little nuances like the way I will raise an eyebrow or pause and look, is because I'm looking at it from both sides of the scene. I give the audience time to digest what they need to before rushing off and going to the next line, if I'm speaking. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely been an effect of realizing what happens where. Even when I watch speakers move on stage, but not move with purpose, they sort of saunter back and forth, they shift weight from side to side. And directors have always said to me, when you're moving, what is your motivation for going to that side of the stage? Mm-hmm. And so I've heard this from my audiences. They said, you stood in one place and you kept our attention. How did you do that? So what I've learned is not to create unnecessary movement, mm-hmm. but it's more because I've seen it from the production side, mm-hmm. and then I know how to transfer it to the actual speaking side.
Okay. So what is the difference? what is the difference between moving what seems like arbitrarily and what you said, move with purpose? When you move with purpose, what is the purpose and what are you doing? What movement are you making when it's purposeful?
Excellent question. When I'm moving arbitrarily, it's taking away my power.
Okay.
For any speaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen some people just shift 2 steps forward, shift 2 steps back. That's usually nervous energy. It's not energy that is directed for any reason. And so you can see them walk someplace and then go back to where they were, but it has nothing to do with the story. Mm-hmm. If I move intentionally, I may be moving to take you to a different space and time. And so anytime I move to a specific part of the stage, it's usually to take you somewhere, to travel with me. And then I want you to come back to center. I'll walk back to the center. And sometimes it's a gesture, or it's a glance, or complete silence. But all of it is done with purpose. And doesn't necessarily mean that it's planned, but when it happens, it's intentional.
There are some things that you just said that I am very, very curious about. So this idea of purposeful motion, and that when you move, it's because you're inviting the audience to be on a sort of a journey with you. Is that journey a different part of a different place and time? Is it a story that you might be telling? Like what differentiates the center, which I imagine is the present moment, from you've moved two steps downstage right, for example? What is the difference, and what are you usually telling people when you are off the center? I don't want to say off center because that has a negative connotation. When you are off the center of the stage, what is happening there?
Yeah, so a number of things. If I want to be more intimate, in fact, if I want to share a secret with you, if I were to do it just in real life, I wouldn't run into a room and go, I got a secret. That's not the way we share secrets.
I hope not.
We lean in. Mm-hmm. So if I want to tell you something that is juicy, or I'm going to give you a point that, listen, I'm only sharing this with you, I may lean in, I may take a step forward, but I'm doing it the way that I normally would in a conversation. Is that I got something good to tell you, come here. Because when I lean in, the audience leans in. Whereas if I want to take them back, think about reading a book. Right? We read from left to right. And what we have to remember is that our left is not the audience's left. So if I want to take them back in time, I'm going to move to my right, because if they were reading a book, that would be the way their eyes would progress. So I take them from my right of the stage and I would walk them to the center in order to move them from the past to the present.
Okay, so there's a lot of... I'm sorry. Keep going.
So just more to my left, if I wanted to take them into a different scenario, take them to a different place forward, I would walk in that direction.
Interesting. Okay, so I have a couple of questions. I have so many questions now. So it seems like there's a psychology at work here about looking at farther back. You might go to a different part versus just a little bit further back, but you use the stage as almost another character in your speech, which I think is incredible and fabulous. But the question I have is, what do you do and how do you modify it when you have either an international crowd who might read from right to left or from top to down, versus like if you were in China, they read from top to bottom rather than right to left, or I mean left to right. Do you modify that? And if so, how do you do it?
I haven't modified it. And that would be, I'll give you a straight answer. I'm not sure how I would do that in that sort of audience. I have had one instance. I've had more than one where I've done international audiences, but I've only had one where the language was completely different in that the audience spoke about 5 different languages. English was one of them, but it wasn't their first. And so I had to be more careful and definitive when I made points. And sometimes if I saw their head tilt slightly to the right, then I knew it meant they didn't get it. And I'd go back and I'd rephrase what I said. So in that case, what I might use is what we do in improv. And in improv, we have an object play. So that wherever you place an object, whether it's a desk or a can or whatever you're playing with, it's always there.
Mm-hmm.
So I may not necessarily be focusing on past or present, but if I create a scene on a certain place within the stage, and it always stays there.
Mm-hmm.
And that way I have to remember where I place my objects.
Sure. I mean, this sounds like theater games. We used to do the same thing in theater classes in college and high school. So, okay. This brings up the entire concept of body language in communication, in giving speeches. What role does body language play when you're speaking, and what role do you talk to your students and the people you teach how to speak? What role do you say body language plays?
It plays a huge role. Now, I don't believe in the 7-8-55 or 7-38-55 breakdown.
Uh-huh.
I know a lot of people talk about that, the Alba-Moravian study. It wasn't talking about what percentage of our communication is body language versus words. That being said, body language is important because there are things that we will do culturally that make people perceive our message a different way.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I've spoken with audiences before where, and most recently, maybe a year and a half ago, there were a number of women in the audience, and we were discussing eye contact. And because they were from different places throughout the world, and some from cultures that don't respect women, when we got to the question of eye contact, one of the participants said, I try to keep as little eye contact as possible because some of the men will actually make it unsafe and even make sexual gestures towards you as a result.
Wow.
And so this is where we do have to really understand who our audience is. I don't even know if they have this series or when I first traveled to Australia, called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. And it talked about the different cultures and what was acceptable in different places.
Mm-hmm. So
we do have to consider when we're using body language, what does it mean if we have a mixed audience or if you have an audience that is a completely different culture when you do certain gestures. Again, some cultures, if they put their head down, it means they're thinking. It doesn't mean they're bored.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just have to be aware of our energy levels. Because energy levels also play a role. There are some cultures that don't want a high energy level. If you are the rah-rah with your hands high above your head type speaker, you may be traumatizing your audience. So body language plays a huge role in that it can instill confidence, it can show defensiveness, it can show empathy, it can show a number of different items. All of it, though, is based on culture.
I can see how certainly that thing that you said about eye contact, or in some cultures you shouldn't use your left hand, things like that, or show the bottoms of your feet. There are a lot of different aspects of that. I know the State Department used to, I don't know if they do anymore, they used to have this big document that you could go and look up the different countries that you might go visit and all the different cultural body language sort of mores to know about and watch out for if you were going to go visit Colombia versus if you were going to go visit China or Uzbekistan or somewhere like that. So it's
Mm-hmm.
you know, they take it very seriously, this idea of body language and culture. I love that you pay attention to that in your speeches and also when you teach people how to speak. Another thing that you said that I think is really interesting, and it was about the silences. I would love it if you would, I know silence is powerful, and I would love it if you would talk about what do you think gives silence its power? What is it about silence that is powerful?
A couple things. One, we're not comfortable with. If you have a conversation in general, most people like to keep talking. And if they stop talking, there might be an or another, what we call filler word that we'll put in.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just not used to being silent. But silence is where we have the opportunity to think. And if I give you a juicy piece of information, or I ask you a question that could be transformational for you,
Mm-hmm.
the worst thing I could do is keep talking.
I can see that.
And this is why I get very frustrated, one, with some of the questions that speakers ask, because they're rhetorical questions that are not meant to be answered. But the other one was, if you just gave me something so good, and I'm thinking back to a time in my life when this happened, or I'm thinking about how I can use what you just said, and you keep talking, one, you're losing me, but also you're interrupting my ability to process that information in the moment, and it may never come back.
Mm.
So silence is powerful in music. You know, there's that little pause that makes you just wait for a second. Think about how in a concert, even when you know what the next word is, and sometimes the band doesn't sing it. Say the notes. You know, there's an anticipation that builds when there's silence.
Mm-hmm.
So you can use it in so many different ways. If I'm about to tell you something, listen, this is the biggest tip I can give you that has helped me to get where I am today. I'm giving you time to get your pen. I'm giving you time to whip out your paper. I'm giving you time to sink in and say it already. Now I've got you engaged.
I love it. I love it. There's an old apocryphal tale about Mrs. Johann Sebastian Bach. Do you know this story?
I do not.
Oh, it's wonderful. So apparently Bach hated to get up in the morning, and she needed him to get up and get moving. And so while he was in bed, lounging, sleeping, she would come over to the pianoforte, and she would essentially go, da, 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 da. And within just a couple of seconds, he'd be running down the stairs and he'd be screaming, resolve that chord. And then he'd go, da, and he'd play the D major chord or whatever. So, because he couldn't handle it. So I love that story. And whenever I talk to my students about it, it's that, it's that, oh yeah, sometimes you need to give that anticipation, it's so interesting. The other one that I love to do is dun, 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 dun. Thank you. Right. But isn't it interesting how that anticipation builds? Because especially in music, we need to have that, there are certain composers that don't resolve things, but we, for the most part, want to have some kind of punctuation mark on that chord or that phrase or something. So it's really interesting that the silence there builds in anticipation in music, in speaking. Anytime you have, like in books, you have the same kind of thing when you have page turners and you want the end of the chapter is silence and now you need more. So I'm so glad that please go ahead.
Yeah, when I think about the song that comes to mind for me is Michael Jackson, She's Out of My Life.
Ah, yes.
There aren't a lot of words, number one. You know what the chorus is, and if you hear him do it live, it's amazing because he gets to the last sentence, she's out of my life. You love me, Michael. And Michael just sits there. And then after everyone finishes their cheering, and everyone starts cheering again. It's just you wait for that moment. You savor it. And speakers should learn or could learn so much from musicians in just taking that little pause.
Yeah, well, there's a wealth in that little pause because it is a buildup of energy and it's a buildup of anticipation. And I think it's so wonderful to have that acknowledged. I love that you do in your speaking and in your singing. It's really amazing that you have that awareness. So I would love it if we could pivot just a little bit and talk about the awareness you had that you were the first Canadian actor to play Mufasa. and you sang, which is one of my favorite Disney songs ever, right? The Circle of Life. So can you talk a little bit about what all of that was like in the anticipation, in the silences? I mean, he's not much of a talker in that way, right? He's got a lot of wisdom that he imparts, but
Yes.
he doesn't do anything halfway, and he doesn't do anything trifling. So what was that like, building that character? In fact, let me go even further back. What was the audition process like? Can you talk about that, please?
I can. And people will be surprised at this, that I did it on a whim. But at the time that I auditioned for the show, I was on an airplane. My speaking business was taking off. I can't even tell you where I was coming from, but it was an ad in a newspaper. It said singers wanted for The Lion King. One of my pastimes when I was on the road to keep myself from going crazy was to find a karaoke bar. Okay, so I figured my karaoke is pretty good. Keep in mind, I hadn't even made my school talent show or jazz choir, but I figured, hey, no big deal. I'm just going to try it. So it said that they wanted you to do a cappella, and they wanted 16 bars of a song, a cappella, come prepared with a resume. Fine, did that. Nothing on my resume, but I came anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got there, they said, it's going to be about 3 hours before you actually get to audition. Do you have your sheet music? I think a sheet music. They said a cappella. So within my 3 hours, I went to the music store and I found my best karaoke song, which was I Just Called to Say I Love You.
Oh, Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, I had been doing this in the karaoke bars for months now. I was prepared. So I got back whenever my time was up. They sent me in to see, I guess, one, not casting agent, but I guess the screening person.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in, I did my Stevie. No New Year's Day to celebrate, no chocolate cup and candy hearts to give away. And they loved me and they said, have you seen Stephanie yet? And I said, no, I have not. They go, okay, you need to see Stephanie. Stephanie was a casting director.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent me over to Stephanie, and Stephanie looks at my resume. She says, Watkis, do I know you? I said, no. She goes, did you audition for Rent? I said, no, I've never auditioned for a show before. She goes, but I know your name. And she thought about it for a few more moments, and she says, Watkis, Joshua Watkis, do you know Joshua? I said, yeah, he's my son. He goes, oh, I hire him for commercials all the time. Is he trying out? Can I? So as a background, Joshua at the time was maybe 4 or 5 years old. I think I was 3. Yeah, he would have been 6 years old at the time. But he had been doing commercials for 3 years by then. So he was one of those kids who just talked. Right? He was like me, always talking, got commercials because we just happened to be at a party with an agent. But Stephanie says, I know Joshua. Okay, let me audition. So I auditioned. I sang my song. They gave me a script for Mufasa. And they said, okay, we will have you back. So that was serious. Right? And this was just supposed to be a fun thing that I did. And hopefully they'll give me 2 complimentary tickets to go see the show when it comes. And next thing I know, I have a call back. So I switched from Stevie to Kenny. Kenny Rogers is one of the best. Mm-hmm. Listened to him growing up. And I believe I sang She Believes in Me while she waits for me. Stay out late at night and play my song. So that is the song that I sang.
Nice.
And when I was walking out, the person who walked me in said, your knees were shaking. So initially there was, very first interview, I was great. Very first audition, I was great. This one, it actually meant something.
Sure.
And I was shaking. They had me in for one more. By the way, I wanted to be Scar. I did not want to be Mufasa.
Why is that?
I grew up watching wrestling. So I like the diabolical characters in wrestling. And Scar, for me, just had more personality. So I wanted to be Scar, but I always get the good guy roles. I was like, oh, he's nice. And I did some dance and some movement when they took me to audition and wanted to see how well I could do the choreography. And they had me do one more audition where I did the reading. Mm-hmm. And it was weeks and I heard nothing. And I thought, not going to happen. I can go back to my speaking. And then they called, we'd like you to be the understudy for Mufasa. It didn't make sense. To this day, I still don't know how it happened because it happened so easily. It wasn't the story of someone who struggles, to get their big role. Because I walked in off the street and it happened for me.
Meant to be.
Meant to be.
Yeah. So you got the role, and then I love I honestly, this is going to sound really weird, but I love that you were the understudy because I've always wanted to know, what do you do when you're the understudy? When you might be on, you might not be on, you might be on, you might not be on. What is the life of an understudy? What is that like?
Depends on how badly you want to get on. I'll tell you this, the longer you don't get on, the more you want it. Mm. And so it was 6 months until I got to go on. And I understand that some understudies never do. Hmm. Eugene, if you're out there, I love you. But but Eugene got injured during one show. It had nothing to do with me.
I like that you clarified that.
Just in case he's listening. Eugene is a former football player. I don't want him looking for me. But the flying in The Lion King is a very risky move. Mm. And unfortunately, they dropped him during one of the flying scenes.
Wow.
And so his ribs were injured, his leg was hurt, and he was doing the show for at least a good week, unable to carry Simba. And that was one of the requirements. So they did everything they could to shift around him not being able to carry Simba. Mm-hmm. At this point, and again, Gene, I love you, but you're rubbing your hands together, licking your chops, right. And just, come on, put me in, coach. I'm ready.
I can do it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, the irony is, the very first time they put me on stage, he did the matinee. It was a Saturday. He did the matinee, and it was clear he could barely even move. Mm. John, you're on tonight. I nearly lost my mind. I don't know what happened in between the time they told me I was on and the time that I actually stood backstage in costume. I was flipping out. And I just had a rehearsal. Went through a full rehearsal in costume. Here's what you need to do. Here's where you need to be. There's your mark, move, go, the whole 9 yards. I had it. And that night, Saturday night, June 3rd, 2000, as I'm standing backstage and the shout goes out, and I look at Topaz and I say to her, I can't do this. She goes, yes, you can. I said, I can't do this. I had never in my entire life had stage fright. So here I was, age 30, legs going to jelly, heart beating, and I just didn't feel like I had what it took to be on the stage that day. I was frightened out of my wits. So I had a couple places to go. It was either on the stage or on the street in my lion costume. Right? The choice is clear what I needed to do. But all the way up, we walked up Pride Walk. It's a winding staircase. Mm-hmm. And The gazelles are going across the stage, everyone's singing, and we are, I can't do this. Yes, you can. I can't do this. Yes, you can. And it was a drama. I'm glad our mics were off, because we made it to the top of of Pride Rock. The theater held 2,000 people, and it was packed every night. Mm-hmm. And so when we got up there, and they hold Simba up, Rafiki holds up Simba, and I'm supposed to be looking at him, I'm just looking at everybody in the audience, freaked out. And it's still in my show notes. My director gave me notes that day. I still have them. Like, look at Simba, not at the audience. But I made it through the show. You know, get on stage, look, Simba. Everything the light touches is our kingdom. And it worked. But it was gripping. The fear was gripping. The good thing was I had to go on the next night. And I probably did 5 or 6 shows in a row. And by the time I got to night 2, I had my lion walk down. I was good. Everything was sweet. But that first night was an absolute terror.
What was the difference between the 2 nights? Was it, I've done it, so now I can? Or did you do anything specific or special to get from, oh no, to I've got this between those 2 nights?
You nailed it, because I've done it. Okay. But whatever I was fearing, because it wasn't a logical fear. Remember, I had been speaking at this time. I had been in front of camera since I was 10. There was no reason. I just had a rehearsal prior to that. No reason for me to be scared. But once I got on the stage and I did it, the next day it was, okay, you've done it. Let's do it again. That's all I needed.
And what happened from then? You did it for 6 performances, and then did you get a chance to do more than that? And if so, what about the character spoke to you then, and what about the character speaks to you now, as far as a performer, as far as a father, all of those things? I'm sure that you brought a lot of yourself to the role, and I'd love to explore what that meant the first time versus the 10th time versus the, I don't know how long you played the role as far as an understudy or not, versus the 100th time.
I was there for a year. Mm-hmm. I played the role more than 20 times. And there was another understudy, by the way. So this was also another one of the parts or the challenges of being the understudy, that there were 2. Because what happened if you went down and the lead went down? Then what?
Right.
By the time I left, there were 3 understudies, because Eugene had gone injured badly. This show injured a lot of people, which is a very physically challenging show. And because they had the other understudy go on, and I went back to my roles, and then not only just my roles, but as other people got injured and have to do different roles in the show. Uh-huh. When they brought me back to play Mufasa again, the director's words to me were, well, you made it through the show. Because that's how bad it was.
Oh my.
If you're not doing it constantly, you know, he said, you did well to make it through the show. You remembered all your lines. And that's all that we could ask of you. That's how bad it was. Because you haven't done it consistently, and there's a chemistry that's created with the other characters, and there's a knowing where and when you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. But again, as they put me on a few times in a row, it made a difference. So the moment I can remember most, actually, there are 2. One was the final show for the original Simba and Nala. Because we had 2 sets of Simba and Nala. They would alternate shows. The little kids, not the adults, but the little ones. Mm-hmm. And they were coming to the end of their time there. And as we were on the top of Pride Rock, after Simba does what he's not supposed to do and the hyenas nearly kill him, Mufasa has this line, which is, I thought I might lose you. And I can remember, because it was the last day on stage for this young Simba, I connected to it being my son. And I nearly cried up on the top of Pride Rock saying that line. I can still remember the feeling that I had as I delivered it. And because I was thinking, like you said, of myself as a father. So there was that one moment. The other one was when my sons actually came and watched the show. Because again, as the understudy, you don't know when you're on. You might be told last minute. And then you might get a call. If you're going on the next day, they'll still call you the next day and say, hey, you're on. So I would keep asking every time I got a chance, can my sons come? Finally, they get to come. And one of the dressers said to me, we had people who helped us get in and out of costume backstage.
Sure.
One of the dressers, when I sang the song, They Live in You, this is Mufasa solo, she said, I normally don't listen when you're doing your song. I just go about my day. But you did something different today. I said, yeah, my sons were out there. And it came across in the way that I performed. As I think now about what I identify with, it's been a challenge for me because Mufasa was a bold, courageous, all-knowing father. And for me, I feel the exact opposite. As someone who was fatherless and who didn't grow up with a male figure, I was always guessing. I was a father by default in that, okay, I guess this is what you're supposed to do. I didn't have a role. I didn't have the ancestors that Mufasa had. And so I didn't have that confidence. And now I turned 50 this year, with my granddaughter. There's a new confidence. I'm actually embracing my age. I'm embracing being a grandfather. And so now I feel more of the confidence that he felt. I feel more bold and being willing to say, you know what, I'm good at this. Hey, I do this well. And it was always uncomfortable for me when someone says, hey, you did a great job, to be able to accept that without trying to brush it off. I've done better. So now I am more willing and more bold.
Amen. That's wonderful, because it's so interesting, isn't it? How we have to grow into some of that awareness and some of that confidence. And some of it happens when we are able to get the experience of doing it, the experience of being that way, of playing that role. And I don't mean playing that role as a throwaway thing. I mean, you in some ways, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, as a parent, you play that role until you get used to it a little bit. And it sounds like you didn't get used to all of that until you became a grandparent. So it's even more powerful as a vulnerability, or as being vulnerable, to be able to admit that to yourself.
Absolutely. And the wonderful thing is, as I see my son and his daughter, I know that he has gotten it better. He at least had something to work with. At least he had a father who taught him and sat with him and read to him. And so he'll still tell me that there are things he remembers that I taught him as a child that still resonate with him. And he has taken that and he's done 100-fold in the way that he raises my granddaughter. It's beautiful to see. Oh. So it gets better.
Well, and it's also, these are all teachable moments. You taught him by example, as well as the lessons you actually taught him, kind of like Mufasa and Simba, but also, as John, and I don't know which of your sons has the daughter, Joshua or the other one. But
Joshua.
Yeah. So if Joshua has, a daughter, then you have taught him both by your example and also the lessons that you tried to teach him. And it sounds like you are a quintessential and an elemental teacher, that you're really wonderful at it. And that brings me around to your speaking. I would love to chat with you some about what you're trying to achieve when you're on stage and you speak. You're obviously trying to reach people and teach people, but what are you trying to achieve when you're on there speaking about how to help people speak better?
I am trying to teach people a skill. Now, when I say teach people a skill, there's more depth to that. So let me go to the surface first. It's a skill that will help them get their ideas accepted. If I go way back into my early days in school, I have a background that's varied. I'm a first generation Canadian. My parents are Jamaican. My grandmother is Cuban. But because I was the first one born in Canada, and I didn't have an only Jamaican influence, I didn't grow up with an accent. Although, if you were good in linguistics, you'll know there's something different about my style of speech. But we had kids in my class who came to Canada from Jamaica, and they spoke with an accent. Mm-hmm. And we also had kids from Korea and India, all over the world. Toronto is the most multicultural city in the world. And they took the kids who spoke with an accent and put them in English as a second language class, along with the Koreans or the Indians who never spoke a word of English. Mm-hmm. You have to imagine the effect that has on a child when they're put back because of the way they speak. Mm-hmm. So I knew, if not consciously, subconsciously, I understood the importance of being able to speak in a way that would create respect for it. And I'm helping people find their voice and the courage to speak and the belief in themselves and to be okay with people not accepting your ideas, but also knowing how to influence people so that they'll want to listen and hear you out. So it may seem like a simple skill, but I know that if you can speak well, if you can create a clear message, if you can connect with people when you speak, you have much greater odds of being successful in absolutely anything you do. So I'm giving them a secret weapon and advantage, but more so an opportunity to avoid the rejection that comes with not being what is considered the norm.
What is the title of your speech?
I have a couple of them. Okay. If you're talking about the speaking one, it's how to capture and keep audience attention.
And the other one?
Is Lessons in the Circle of Life, which is a journey through my time on stage and backstage in The Lion King. And then there's one that's based on my book, which is How to Make a Speech Music to Their Ears.
And that's Speaking Notes. That's the book that
we
mentioned
based on
earlier.
the books. Yeah, that's based on the book Speaking Notes.
Okay, so can you talk a little bit about that? I want to talk also about the process you go through to create one of your speeches, but really, not everyone's going to be able to come and hear you speak, but everyone can at least get your book out of the library, if not go buy it from Amazon or from your website, which I do want to find out exactly. It is an Amazon, but if they want if someone wants an autographed copy, there's a different way to go about getting a copy. Is that correct?
Yes, there is. And I'll make sure that you have the website link, because it's one of those confusing links on my johnwatkis.com website that you can put in the show notes. Anyone who wants it can just go and click right on it and go directly to the book.
Perfect. So tell me about Speaking Notes. What inspired you to write the book, and what exactly is the book about?
The book is about the 8 elements of music that are in successful speeches. Now, I wish that I were brilliant enough to have actually come up with the idea, but it was one of my clients who gave me the idea. Here's how it went. I wrote a speech for her. Speech went fantastic, and she said, "Hey, this was the response to the speech. I have a question for you. Do you play a musical instrument?" This was in the early days of email. Okay, so she didn't know anything about me outside of me being a speechwriter. Mm-hmm. And I responded to her by saying, "Why are you asking?" Because she didn't know my history. She didn't know my background. And her response was that someone told her a long time ago, if you are going to hire a speechwriter, make sure they're musical. because a speech is meant to be written for the ear. And so it has to have pauses and rhythm and crescendos. And when she read my speech, she felt it had all of those elements. So she said to her husband, I bet you John is musical. And when she said that to me, her question was, or two questions. She said, one, have you heard this theory? And then, what do you think? And I was floored. Because as a creative, I don't think about how I do what I do. I feel it, I write it, that's it. So I thought, okay, let me just see. I went to do as much research as I could, find any studies, any articles, any books. Is there similarities or are there similarities between music and speeches? Couldn't find anything. So I decided, let me look at music composition, how we put together songs, and then let me look at the successful speeches and see if I can find similarities between those two. And I found 8 elements that are in music that are also in successful speeches. And that's what caused me to dive in and say, well, let me go further with this. So one of the biggest similarities is what is success in the speech? It has to do the 3 things that music does. With music, we remember it, we repeat it, and we respond to it. Mm-hmm. So every successful speech, we remember it. We remember maybe even just key little points or key little words, but we'll say, I saw a speaker years ago, and I remember when she said, or I remember when he said, and we remember it. Then we repeat it. So if you think about, we shall fight on the beaches, ask not what your country can do for you, I have a dream. We repeat those long after the speech is done. Mm-hmm. And just like with music, we may not have heard a song for years, but we can still remember it word for word. And then most importantly, we respond to music. Music comes on in the store, people are around us that we don't know, but we can't stop dancing because it's our song. Right? We respond to it. And in a successful speech, people respond. They respond by donating. They respond by buying your goods. They respond by changing their behavior. So if we remember, repeat, and respond to a speech, it's part of the elements that are in the music.
I'm a musician myself, and I'm listening to you, and I'm going, yes, absolutely, yes, of course, and yet they're different, right? When I'm playing a song, if I'm on stage and I'm singing "Summertime" or "Natural Woman" or something like that, I'm not looking at asking them to buy something, unless maybe it's one of my songs I'm playing, and then maybe they might want to buy the MP3 or whatever. I'm looking to have an impact and to entertain, but is that what a speech is then? Is that what a speech is trying to do? Or is there a divergence there between music and giving a speech in that aspect of it? I mean, speeches should or can be or ought to be perhaps entertaining, but is there a degree that's different? And if so, what is it?
I believe there are small degrees.
Okay.
Small degrees of difference. And that is, if you're giving a presentation, or if you're singing, let's put the music, you're not necessarily trying to change behavior.
Right.
In the moment you are, because you want people to dance when they wouldn't necessarily be dancing. So in the moment you want them to change behavior. Whereas with the speech, it's a long term of wanting them to change behavior. Mm-hmm. But if you think about what a good musician does, and as you're doing it on stage, you're trying to connect with your audience.
Sure.
Every speaker, and I don't care what the topic is, if they want their message to resonate, has to connect. And so that is where I find it most similar, is that especially if people disagree with you, right? How do you get someone who doesn't like rock music to listen to a song that you're singing in rock, in a style of rock? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe you take familiar lyrics from one of their favorite types and you put it into rock, and you're just enough that there's a bit of recognition. And they go, that's all right. Just maybe. And with speeches, I'm doing the same thing. If you have a different point of view,
Mm-hmm.
my goal is to connect with you by not just understanding your point of view, but by stating it. Because if I can create that connection that I understand you, I'm going to move you further to the point where you're willing to listen to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's an empathy thing, it sounds like, also.
Absolutely. And it's not easy because, as you said, it's not just, I know what your point is. It's, I can see why you see it that way.
Right.
Not only that, I'll allow you to sit with it that way and not try and change your mind. I would like to sing my song at the same time. And so now you're more willing to hear me out because I haven't asked you to change your mind.
Right. And then you're both sort of working on the same team. And to me, when I give a speech, when I'm up on stage, that's what I'm going for. I am trying very hard for all of us to be going towards the same goal, whatever that goal is, whether it is to help them communicate better or to help them become, more innovative or whatever I'm being hired to do the speech for. I'm trying for all of us to be on the same team going for that goal. How much of that kind of teamwork plays a role in your speaking and when you're working with an audience?
100%. The first thing I want to know is, what does the audience feel about my topic?
Mm-hmm.
And what's their understanding of my topic? How do they feel about it? Do they agree? Do they disagree? Do they want to be there? Because there are times where, regardless of the topic, there are people who might not even want to be in the same room.
Mm-hmm.
And I can give an example of this where a whole company was brought to a presentation I was doing. It was on presentations, but one of the people who was attending taught presentation skills.
Mm.
And maybe not even realizing that I was in the room, her words were, I'm reading this, I can't believe I have to sit through a whole session of this. This is what I do every day.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't an emotional topic, but she clearly was not thrilled about having to sit through the session.
Right.
And so what I did, knowing that, was to ask for her assistance. Hey, you do this all the time. How do you handle this?
Right.
And oh my gosh, it improved 100%. She was smiling. Sometimes she'd say, oh yeah, he's absolutely right. So if you can find people where they are and connect with them where they are, it's so much easier, as you said, to move in the same direction. So that is always my goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's so interesting that I call it when I talk to people and I teach them about communication and we encounter situations like this lady, I say deputize them. That's the if you have someone who's like, oh, I know this already, I make them my deputy. They're the person who is second in command, and they love it because then they feel heard and they feel valued, and that's a lot of what this is remembering that we are all in that position at one time or another where we're not sure of our value. And if somebody else gives us an acknowledgement of our value in that way, then we become a lot more open to what they have to say.
Absolutely.
There's so much there. There's such a wealth of information and knowledge and psychology in the idea of laying yourself bare in some ways, when you're when you're on stage speaking, it's just you and your words and your ideas. So when you're about to go on stage, how do you prepare? What do you do before a speech to get yourself ready to go on stage and make a speech, especially being a shy person and perhaps an introvert? What do you do to get yourself hyped up, as my 22-year-old nephew would say?
I usually don't have problems getting hyped up as soon as I open my mouth. I do my best to stay to myself. And I know a lot of people like to get in and mingle with the audience and talk to them. Hi, how are you doing? That for me is labor. Mm-hmm. I will do tongue twisters and I will do scales. So I still do my scales from the Lion King. This is what I'm doing. Or doing stretches with my face, stretching out the body, because nervousness stays in your body unless you release the tension. Mm-hmm. So my pre-speech, pre-presentation ritual is just going through my scales, doing my tongue twisters, loosening up my face before I'm ready to go. And people will actually hear me do it. I'll stand at the front of the room and still go through it. They find it entertaining.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I actually, I do the same thing. And then sometimes I, make those faces that we make when we're warming up there and making people laugh. So when you go into a company or an what sorts of companies and organizations do you work with? Do they actively look for someone who does what you do, or are you booked some other way? Like what is the process there? And when you're there, who do you work with? Do you work with teams of people, the entire company? How does all that work?
A variety of ways. There are so many different types of clients. One might be a speaker. I actually work with speakers who are trying to get their content together. They're subject matter experts,
mm-hmm.
but they don't know how to take all the content they have and put it into a format that's entertaining and interesting.
Mm.
So I work with those. I also work with the organizations who might have people on their team who are not confident speaking, but they're being thrust into the position of having to speak more. Mm-hmm. So they'll represent the company.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have some groups that are from different countries that are coming together for a cohort. It's a number of different ways. My next funeral, I say funeral, let's not try that. My next in-person speech is already scheduled for August in the midst of all of this craziness. Wow. It is for a group of funeral directors. So in person, I've got 50 funeral directors. If anything happens, I'm in good hands.
Oh my.
Right, but they found me from my videos on my website. And here's the irony. They found me on a video that I had been hiding for nearly 20 years.
Really?
Yes. It was a video that I did in my early speaking years. I didn't want it to represent what I would do now. Mm-hmm. And so I hid it. But I was given the advice, have something on your page. This is enough. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, I get this call and the client says, hey, I was watching your video and I could not stop watching it. Remember, this is what I've been hiding for nearly 20 years.
Wow.
So sometimes, again, perfectionism is one of my biggest issues. That's also, by the way, a problem with being on the producer side, is you see things and you tend to become a perfectionist. Mm-hmm. And so that's how, it could have held me back. But fortunately, the video was up on my website. I occasionally do live videos on Facebook, and I've done some videos on LinkedIn. So when people are seeing these, they're now connecting to me.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting, isn't it? How something that for you might be a throwaway, oh yeah, I did that a long time ago, might be just the very thing that someone needs to hear right now. It's a resource for them that they think is magnificent, that you might not even be crediting for all it's worth, which I think that's so fascinating. And we keep learning. And sometimes we go back to something we did 20 years ago and find that we still learn lessons from it. And I'm wondering, do you have something like that aside from this video, which was a great example, do you have something that's something that happened or that was a lesson you learned 20, 25, 30 years ago that still comes back fresh every once in a while?
Absolutely. And it happened on stage once. What it was is we were having some situations with management, the production company for The Lion King. Mm-hmm. And I was really upset about it, upset to the point that I let it show on my face while performing. Mm. And one of the dancers turned to me and he called me Watkis. That was it. I didn't have a first name. He called me Watkis. He said, Watkis, I don't care what's going on. The people who came to see this didn't have anything to do with it. You never let them see that face. And it's a reminder for me that no matter what is happening, in any aspect of my personal life or professional life. When it comes to the client, when I show up at 100%, and you never will be able to tell what's happening backstage. And so I have done presentations at this point in my life, and we have ups and downs as artists, where I've been homeless and sleeping in a car and going out and giving a presentation, and you wouldn't know the difference, because I've learned to separate everything else that's happening from being what I would consider my safe haven. When I'm in front of people, there's no other place, save holding my granddaughter, where I would rather be.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. And your castmate was absolutely right. The people in the audience have nothing to do with what's going on in your personal life or whatever. They came to see a show, and it is incumbent upon you and me and whoever else to be there 100% and to be present with what's
Yes.
happening. And that was, I have a thing in my refrigerator that says, never let yesterday take up too much of today. And I think that is, those are words of wisdom. So speaking of that, speaking of quotes and ideas and resources, can you recommend any resources aside from, because of course, speaking notes is something that I'm going to be putting on the show notes for people to go and get if they want to improve their speaking abilities. What other resources might you recommend to people who want to begin speaking or who want to improve their presentation skills?
There are a couple. Toastmasters is one.
Mm-hmm.
Toastmasters International is a great club that gives you the opportunity to go weekly and have a meeting. Of course, right now the meetings are being done via Zoom.
Sure.
So I have been attending meetings in different spaces, but if you're someone listening to this a year from now or out and about and face-to-face, in your area, there will be a Toastmasters club. And what's most important about the Toastmasters Club is it gives you repetition, the opportunity to keep speaking. You get better if you keep speaking and then you get corrective feedback.
Mm-hmm.
But if you miss that opportunity to keep speaking, then it'll be hard to get better. So Toastmasters is number one, just so that you can get going.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to look at the composition of speeches, AmericanRhetoric.com. AmericanRhetoric.com is a website that has some of the most powerful speeches given in America. And what I have learned is that if you just look at the different speeches, read them over and over, listen to them, because they have both the text and the audio,
mm-hmm.
the more you expose yourself to it, the more you start to understand how it's constructed and how it all comes together. And then you find it seeping into the way that you do yours as well. So those are the biggest ones that I would recommend.
Fabulous.
And then one more, if you want to learn the business of speaking, of course, the National Speakers Association, which has really helped me accelerate my learning so much. The people are fantastic. They're helpful. They are giving. And there are chapters in many different cities, not as many as would have a Toastmasters, but look at the National Speakers Association. Even we are meeting online right now, but hey, it's where we met as well.
Absolutely.
It's a great opportunity to meet people who are doing this for a living, and we're doing it well.
And they really are. So many of the folks in the National Speakers Association are world-class speakers.
Absolutely.
And do an incredible job. And I know that I could keep you for the next 4 hours because you're so fascinating to talk to, but I know you have a granddaughter to go hold. So I would love to ask you just a couple of more questions, if that's okay. First, what are you curious about right now? What are you learning?
I'm learning about myself. Self-awareness is incredibly important. And as I'm learning more about myself, I'm learning about why I do what I do. In fact, I have just started doing meditation daily. And I use an app called Insight app.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Insight Timer.
Insight Timer. I use the same one.
Wonderful. So it's been leading me through my meditations, helping me focus on my breathing, improving my sleeping. So really getting to know me has been helpful. I'm still making plans. It's not happening yet. I'm making plans to learn the piano and the guitar because I cheated myself out of learning the piano when I was young. I played it in high school, But remember my arch enemy, Hans Engel?
Yes.
In grade 11, we had music class. I played piano, and I was playing it well. I could read, and we sat back to back. So I would play the piano facing, and then if I turned around, there'd be someone with their back to me. I could read their music and play. So I was learning. I was coming along. We had presentations that we had to give, and oral presentations on any topic of our choice. Hans Engel gets up, and this little man, in the day when you didn't have a clicker or anything, had choreographed or synchronized his speech so well that his speech was on the Beatles, by the way. His presentation was on the Beatles. As he started talking about a different song, the song would start playing.
Wow. This
is a 15-year-old kid, okay? He had the tape queued up and the speech memorized and practiced so well that as he changed words, the song would kick in. I was like, bloody hell.
I hear that.
So I hadn't done my presentation yet. And somehow, out of my pride, I said, wait till you see my presentation. Well, I'll tell you what, I never went back to music class after that day.
Oh, no.
Because I couldn't match up to Hans's presentation.
Right.
And I let that desire for perfection and competition cripple me in such a way that it wasn't just back then. And I mean, it was 35 years ago. For the longest time, if I couldn't do something perfectly, I wouldn't do it. So as I'm learning about me and even giving myself grace, I'm going back and I'm doing the things that I wanted to do. Piano is one of those.
And it's a fabulous instrument. So is the guitar. I'm a guitarist, not a pianist, but I love the idea that you are rekindling those old dreams and spending time and energy and investing in yourself. That's lovely. And it's a beautiful, actually, I'm wondering if I should I should ask my last question. I should, because I have this silly question that I ask everybody who's on the show. And as I said, it's a silly question, but it's one I ask anyway. But before I do it, John, I would like to thank you so much for being on the show and for giving so much of yourself and your wisdom. I really, really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed the conversation. I've loved talking with the artists. We get each other.
We do. And yet what's really good is that you're so generous with this gift of art and speech and willing to give it to others. And I think that is incredible. And I'm really grateful for you and for your knowledge and self-knowledge and willingness to share both. So thank you again so much.
Thank you.
So here's my last question before we say goodbye. And it is this: if you had an airplane and you could skywrite something, anything, for the whole world to see, what would you say?
You are enough.
I love that. And here's what's really very interesting about what you just said, is that immediately upon hearing it, I remembered that last week's guest said the same thing.
Really?
Yes. She said the exact same thing. There's a pervasive theme, and I interview mostly creatives, and there's a pervasive theme that you all share. You are enough. Be kind is another one. Kindness is everything. And build relationships, because that's how we are all going to get through it. Those are sort of the themes that pervade all of you. And that one, and create something every day. Those are all, but you are enough. Literally, she said that last week as well. So I'm thrilled, actually, that that it is such a pervasive theme for artists and creatives who come on the show. And I imagine probably for many others who don't come on the show, this idea of what you already have, who you already are is plenty, is something that I think is so important. So once again, John, thank you so much for being on the show.
Isolde, thank you for having me. I have had a lot of fun.
I'm so glad. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you're listening and you want to know more about John Watkis, remember johnwatkis.com is where you're going to be able to find him. And I will put all of his social media links in the show notes so that you can go and you can follow him on LinkedIn and everywhere else that he is. And if you have questions or if you want to order speaking notes, you can do it from his website or from Amazon. The links are also in the show notes. Once again, this is Isolde Trachtenberg for the Creative Mindset Podcast. Today's show was brought to you by my book, Speak From Within. And if you want to know more about that, you know how to find me. Please, please, please review the show if you're listening to it on iTunes or Google Podcasts, wherever it is you listen. Review the show. Let me know what you're thinking about the idea of creativity and creative communication. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and let's get to it. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2020. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I send you all of my love.